So today let's take a look at this donated switching power supply module. Thank you for your donation, and as far as I remember it's faulty, so let's try to fix it, and of course let's also try to reverse engineer the schematic of it and explain how does it work. Let's give it a cable and a plug and test it, and it has a connector here. It says live, neutral, ground, and the output voltage negative, positive, and it seems to also have a potentiometer to adjust the output voltage and an indication LED here and some marking here and here. And it says it's tested and it's only to be serviced by a qualified technician to prevent electrocution. That sounds interesting. And the rating is input universal mains. Or actually, it's not a universal mains, it's 100 to 120 volts AC or 200 to 240 volts AC. So it seems like you have to switch the voltage. It's not a universal mains, and the output voltage is 5 volts 10 amps, which is 50 watts, and that's why probably the type number has 50 in it. So let's give it a cable, and this old cable has green instead of yellow-green for ground. And let's connect it to the terminals. This one is ground, black is live, and blue is neutral. So let's tighten it under the screws and test it. And now let's plug it in. Maybe some explosion, maybe not. And it lights up, but it makes strange noises, strange sounds. Can you hear that? It doesn't seem right. And let's try to measure the voltage at the output. It actually is 5 volts, but the sounds are strange and not sure if it works under a load. So let's try to give it a car lamp as a test load and plug it in. It works, but it kind of flickers, changes brightness. And again it makes strange sounds. It works somewhat, but something is not right. It makes strange noises and the voltage fluctuates. So let's try to take a look in it. And there is a screw and the other one here is missing already. So it's probably just one screw and it opens like this. And that's it. So let's take a closer look in it and identify the components in it, and I can also see a lot of dust in it, so it's not a new unit. It was in use and it probably failed. And here you can see the input terminals, an NTC thermistor for inrush current limitation, some class Y capacitor for interference suppression, some metal oxide varistor for overvoltage protection, some class X1 or X2 capacitor for interference suppression, some fuse at the input, some interference inductor, a double one, so it's probably a common mode interference filter, some other class Y 1 or 2 capacitors for interference suppression. The class Y capacitors go from live or neutral to ground, and the class X1 or X2 capacitors go from live to neutral. And here's a switch which probably switches the voltages 220 or 110. And this one is set to 220, so it's right for my mains. And here's the bridge rectifier, those smoothing capacitors, primary ones, electrolytic ones, and there is a pair of them because when you set it to the lower voltage of mains, you have to have two in series because it's a doubler. It basically charges one of them in one half cycle and the other one in the other half cycle. And there are some resistors, some of them may be startup resistors, some resistors probably in a snubber network, maybe together with this diode and this capacitor. And here's the probably main switching transistor on a heatsink, quite a big one, it looks nice. And there is another small transistor, some small capacitors, resistors, probably in the voltage feedback or in the auxiliary power supply to power the control circuitry. Here's the main switching transformer in it. And here's the optocoupler. to basically sense the voltage on the secondary side, but with an isolation basically. And here's the secondary diode, the main secondary rectifier basically, which is either an ultra-fast diode, or for lower voltages it can be even a Schottky diode with a very low voltage drop. And here you can see the secondary capacitors and the inductor, and then it goes into another capacitor for better high frequency ripple suppression. And the big resistor is probably a loading resistor, so it never runs with no load. And some voltage sensing circuitry here with probably a voltage reference here, the potentiometer and some other components, probably a voltage divider to set the voltage, and the potentiometer is probably a part of the voltage divider, so you can adjust the voltage. And when looking at those electrolytic capacitors, they are bulging on the top, which is the sign that they are probably faulty. They are probably overheated or failing over time, and the electrolyte is evaporating and creating overpressure, which basically makes it bulging on top, and it even makes a hole in the center of the cross, and it basically releases the pressure so it doesn't explode more violently. And I can see a brown spot on the top of this one, which already means that it's open. There is a tiny hole ventilating the pressure in it and also releasing the chemicals from it. So those electrolytic capacitors are at the end of their life, which is probably the fault. And electrolytic capacitors are one of the most unreliable components. They fail very often, especially when working at a higher temperature. So I probably already know the fault, and I already noticed that there is no control chip, or I don't see any. Maybe it's from the bottom SMD, but it seems like it's a traditional single-sided board with no SMD components, just through hole. So it seems like there is no control chip, it's just the main switching transistor and some auxiliary transistor here. So it's a bit old-fashioned. And generally, the higher the power of the power supply, the more likely it is to have a control chip instead of just the discrete transistors. Now let's try to disassemble it to see the other side of the board. It seems there are screws from this side, but not accessible. So I probably have to unscrew this piece of the aluminum heatsink from this part. So let's unscrew those things. And let's try to open it. And does it open, or some more screws? Well, the diode is mounted on this, so I have to unscrew those screws as well. And now it completely falls apart, and I can see the other side of it. And no SMD components. And of course there is this isolation layer under the board to prevent a short circuit from those joints to this heatsink. And it seems like a nice construction, except that they put some heatsink compound on this before mounting it here, but it's just a tiny drop which didn't spread. That's ridiculous. The transistor heatsink has more heatsink compound on it to thermally couple it into the main heatsink. And the isolation distance on the board is quite nice. The line of isolation goes through here, here, and here. And this one is the ground. It's quite nicely isolated, about 5 millimeters, and there are also those slots. So I like the construction, but now let's try to reverse engineer the schematic of it, and let's also try to replace those capacitors. And I noticed one more design flaw, which is actually quite common. This mounting piece actually presses the transistor onto the heatsink, but not evenly. It's tilted, it presses mostly on this side, but not this side. So the transistor basically is pressed onto the heatsink just on this side. And to prove it, let's take a piece of paper and I can actually slide it under the transistor on this side. Not on this side. Here it's tightly mounted and here it's quite loose, actually. There is a gap actually. And this is a horrible design, and in some higher power applications this can lead to overheating and the transistor failing. And of course the diode had the same problem before I disassembled it. Those mounting pieces are quite horrible. Or maybe it could be mounted such a way that it presses onto the center of it, not the side of it. And of course the best solution is to put the screw through the hole. Even though of course this can make it harder to isolate the metal part of the transistor from the heatsink. But of course here the hole is plastic, so it's still easy to put a screw through it. Of course the isolation is more tricky for those packages where the hole is metal. For this kind of diode or transistor package you have to use this plastic insulator on the screw. Can you see that? But it's not necessary with this type of package which has a plastic hole. They could have easily put the screw through the hole and it would have much better contact with the heatsink. But they probably couldn't reach the screw because of those capacitors. And of course you could also put the screw from here and the nut from here, but still, this requires an accurate positioning of the hole in the heatsink. And that's probably why they use this. I could also cut this piece so it presses the transistor in the middle, but it would be a sharp edge, so let's try to bend it. Here in the center of the transistor. This is the heatsink, this is the transistor, and let's actually modify this piece from this to this. It's a profile like this, so let's actually cut it here a little bit, where the center of the transistor is, to be able to bend it. And that's it. Now it touches the transistor here, not here. So I modified those mounting pieces and now let's replace those capacitors and it's fixed. So we removed those 4 capacitors from it and let's measure their impedance using this capacitor tester. It basically measures the resistance of it at a high frequency, about 100 kHz. And it actually says it here. A good capacitor has a low impedance. Now let's try to measure those bad ones. And the impedance is 1.6 ohms for this one, 2.3 ohms for this one, 2.5 ohms for this one, and the last one. And this is the only one which is not bulging. And it's about 30 milliohms only. So this one is actually kind of good, but still its impedance is probably too high to make up for those 3 faulty ones. And now let's try to measure some other capacitors which are actually used but probably still good. And they are similar ratings. And this good one is just 9 milliohms. Still better than this best one out of those 4. 12 milliohms this one. 11 milliohms. 24 milliohms. But of course those are used, so they may not be perfect. And this one is just 9 milliohms. 9 milliohms again. So the good ones are about 10 milliohms, roughly. The only one which is not bulging is already several times higher, and the bulging ones are like more than 100 times more than it should be. So let's put those nice capacitors in it with a low impedance. And the small one here at the output after the inductor is about 60 milliohms. Another capacitor with the same rating is just 24 milliohms. So let's also replace it, despite it still may not be necessary. So this one is also replaced, and now let's check those. One of them is 140 milliohms, that's good, and the other one is also 140 milliohms. Let's compare it with another capacitor of a similar rating, and this one is significantly worse. So those ones should be fine. And the last electrolytic capacitor in it, and it's about 3 ohms, which is fine for such a tiny capacitor, just 1 micro. So now all capacitors should be fine, and let's try to reassemble it and test it. And of course I will add some thermal grease on it. And now it's all back together and let's test it. Does it work or explode? And it seems to work nicely. No more strange sounds. Now let's try 2 lamps. It draws 6.1 amps. And 3 lamps draw in a total over 9 amps, which is close to the maximum and it still works nicely. And the voltage at the output at a full load, about 5 volts, and no strange noises, so it seems to be fixed. And of course I'm already working on the schematic of it, but this video is getting too long, so let's finish the schematic and explain it in the next episode. So this is DietGnoWild, and see you in my next videos, and thanks to all of my patrons on Patreon. I really appreciate your support. And of course in the next episode the schematic, and I also plan to take a look inside this small laptop power supply, and I also plan to test some cheap AA and AAA nickel metal hydride batteries and of course measure their real capacity.